pull it out and approve the remainder in one go. We will read them. First off, do any of you have any that you would like pulled out? Any trustees have any resolutions that you would like pulled out for discussion?
The only question I have is that, Kim, when you said, here's the final resolutions, couple changes, I didn't see a document attached at that point.
Yeah, I didn't send it again, Gary. There's just a little, it was resolution number 4. It was just, instead of saying that I will contact the members for a special meeting, I will contact the trustees, just a small technical.
So instead of member, it's trustee?
Yeah, just say it's better. It sounds better.
Okay.
All right. That was it, right? Is that the, that was the.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I was also suggesting that we say in the village clerk would be required, that the village clerk is required.
Is required. Okay.
But I didn't know if you had others, other changes.
No, that was the only last thing.
Okay.
So I thought I just in the when I do the minutes, if we'll have Gary say it that way, and in the minutes I corrected it.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a question on one of them. I don't need it pulled out. I just need a response.
Okay.
Resolution 10, the 8-hour workday regarding the village attorney. Is that a change, or is that just the way?
No,
That's
a standard.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's just
good.
something required by Department of Labor, maybe.
Yep.
They just, yeah.
All right. Thank
Yeah.
you.
It doesn't mean that I work an 8-hour day. It means that the percentage of the day that I work is measured against an 8-hour day.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. I get it. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, we ready to go? Resolution number 1, mayor appointments. Be it resolved that the Village Board of Round Lake approves Mayor Putman's appointment of Kim Dugmore, Sheridan Dugmore as clerk, Jessica Max as treasurer, Thomas Peterson as village attorney, and Joanne McDonough as health officer. Resolution 2, Planning and Zoning Board. Be it resolved that the Village Board of Round Lake approves the updated tenures of Planning and Zoning Board trustees and new Planning Board alternate, Ben Rotundi, Peter Sheridan, this is the Planning Board, Peter Sheridan, chair, 2 years left in his term, Fred Severs, 5 years, Mary Beth Murphy, 3 years, Tim Lasar, 3 years, Lance Spalholtz, 3 years. And Ben Rotundi, alternate on Planning Board, 5 years. On the Zoning Board, Lori Naranch, 1 year, Daniel Curtis, 1 year, Maya McDonough, 5 years, Mark Marion, 3 years, and Dan Shapiro, chair, 4 years. Resolution number 3, trustee assignments. Be it resolved that the Village Board of Round Lake approves Mayor Putman's trustee assignments. Trustee Bergen, Service Ward Program, LoSAP. Trustee Parker, Auditorium Liaison. Trustee Block, PB and ZBA Liaison, and Trustee Coldrick, Deputy Mayor, God help you. Resolution 4, board meetings. Be it resolved by the village, by the Round Lake Board of Trustees that the regular meeting of the Round Lake Village Board will be held on the 3rd Wednesday of each month. Be it resolved by the Village Board of Trustees that a workshop meeting of the Round Lake Village Board of Trustees will be held on the 1st Wednesday of each month as needed. Be it also resolved that when a special or emergency meeting of the Village Board of Trustees is necessary, the village clerk would be required to contact each trustee individually by phone, in person, or by email, if receipt is confirmed, to schedule a meeting. Be it further resolved that the next organizational meeting will be held on Monday, January 3rd, 2022 at 7 p.m. And Jess, nope, number 5 is me. Official newspaper, resolution 5. Be it resolved that the official village newspaper shall be the Daily Gazette. Jess, resolution 6.
Okay, and resolution number 6, audit of claims. Whereas the Round Lake Board of Trustees has determined to authorize payment in advance of audit of claims for public utility service, postage, freight express charges, debt service payments, and contractual expenses. Whereas all such claims must be presented at the next regular meeting of the village board for audit. And whereas the claimant and the officer incurring or approving the claim are jointly and severally liable for any amount the
Come
Board
here.
of Trustees disallows. Now therefore be it resolved,
I got,
section 1 that, what was that?
I dialed in by phone.
Should I
Okay,
keep going?
Yeah.
Okay, now therefore be it resolved, section 1, that the Board of Trustees authorizes payment in advance of audit of claims for public utility service, postage, freight express charge, debt service, and contractual expenses. All such claims must be presented at the next regular meeting for audit, and the claimant and the officer incurring or approving the claim are jointly and severally liable for any amount the Board of Trustees disallows. Section 2, that this resolution is
All right.
effective immediately.
If anybody can hear me, am I on Zoom?
Yeah, you're
that's
on.
why we can see you.
Thank you. I'm a newbie.
Okay, resolution number 7, mileage. Whereas the Round Lake Board of Trustees has determined to pay a fixed rate for mileage as reimbursement to village officers and employees who use their personal automobiles while performing their official village duties. Now therefore be it resolved, section 1, that the Round Lake Board of Trustees will approve reimbursement to such officer and employees at the rate of 56 cents per mile for 2021. Section 2, that this resolution is effective immediately. Resolution number 8, village banking. Whereas the Round Lake Board of Trustees has determined that Village Law Section 4-41232 requires the designation of banks or trust companies for deposit of all village monies. Now therefore be it resolved, section 1, that the Board of Trustees designates the following institutions as depositories of all monies received by the village clerk, receiver of taxes, and treasurer. The Adirondack Trust Company at 473 Broadway in Saratoga Springs, New York, 12866. Section 2, that this resolution is effective immediately.
And Kim, resolution 9.
Okay, resolution 9, meetings and conferences. Whereas there is to be held during the coming official year, certain meetings, conferences, and training schools. Whereas attendance by certain municipal officials and employees at one or more of these meetings, conferences, or schools benefits the municipality. Therefore, now therefore be it resolved, section 1, that the officers and employees are authorized to attend any and all meetings, conferences, or schools as approved by the mayor and board of trustees. Section 2, the resolution is effective immediately.
I have a question.
Resolu-
Is that to attend at the expense of the village?
Yes, I believe so.
It has generally in the past.
Resolution number 10, 8-hour workday. Be it resolved that the Village Board of Round Lake, location code 40453, established an 8-hour workday for the village attorney appointed and will report his record of activities to the New York State and local retirement system. And the last resolution, number 11, adoption of policies. Be it resolved that the Round Lake Village Board of Trustees will continue to follow all existing policies until such time when the village board reviews and amends them. That being said, I did send along a chart of policies. If you guys could have a look, send me a note about if you'd like to work on one with one of us or on your own. Any help would be appreciated. Some of them are just, we just re-adopt them year to year, but some of them might need a little bit of work. And we can talk about that going forward.
Motion to accept,
And that is it.
So
motion
moved,
to approve.
so moved.
Second?
Second.
Who moved it?
Got it.
Tom,
Tom Bergen?
Wait a second, wait. I had one quick question. I was muted. I didn't realize it. I just, when we choose the third Wednesday of the month and the first Wednesday of the month for those, for our meetings, should we have the time of day or does that not matter? You know, at 7 PM? Does it not matter?
I don't know.
that will
if it
change.
Matters.
With public
Mhm.
hearings and stuff, that will change.
Okay, I didn't know whether we were supposed to put that in and then we can change it, but that's all right. Just curious. Okay.
Anybody have any questions about any of
Dis-
them?
Discussion?
Yeah, discussion.
Hey, Paul?
Yes.
We'll vote. Tom,
yes,
Heidi,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
and Gary.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, guys. That was nice and painless.
Okay, next, the workshop business. I guess I will close the organizational meeting and open the monthly workshop. First up is, well, actually, the only thing up is the short-term rentals. I would like to do a very quick introduction.
can I interrupt, Gary?
Yeah,
Isn't there two other items on the organizational thing, or am I looking at it the wrong?
no, those were
Okay.
for this part. Those aren't the organizational part yet.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
We can hit those
Yeah, we'll hit those shortly.
Okay.
Forgot what I was doing here. I'm on Zoom, right? I'm trying to share the
Screen
screen.
share.
Okay, this was sent to you in a noisier version. This doesn't have the music to it. But short-term rentals, the issues, parking, capacity, property values, noise, and safety. Capacity meaning how many people stay at the short-term rental. This is the newest one down overlooking the lake. You'll notice that it says it can host up to 12 guests. That's quite a few. And this was from, I think it was last weekend. There were at least 5 cars there that I saw. I think Matt might have seen 8 cars, but they were parking illegally on the street. So clearly it's over any rational capacity. This is the one across from the village office. And this was the Friday night of the big snowstorm. I was driving by checking things out and I noticed that whoever was staying there had shoveled all the snow right back onto the street. And that pile was about 2 feet high. There's a couple others that were listed on the Airbnb site in the village. And of course, this, I threw this in, I don't know if I should have, because it advertised weekly rentals, so I don't know if that fits under our definition. But in short, currently our code only covers bed and breakfast. There is a process an owner needs to go through to get permission to run a bed and breakfast. There are currently at least 5 short-term rentals, commonly known as Airbnbs, in the village. We reviewed a number of village and town regulations from across New York State and developed a draft building on our existing bed and breakfast regulations. A very short summary is requires a special use permit from the zoning board, must have adequate on-site parking, will require insurance, local contact, operating permit, must meet health department regulations, and a few other things. And with that, I will open it up to discussion. Dan, I sent sent along something that Dan and Tom had worked on, and Peter, along with me and Peter. So I don't know if Dan or Tom or Peter, if you want to add anything before opening it up to discussion.
Hi, Dan. I'm a newbie here, so I hope, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Oh, cool. Okay. Tom, did you do a copy about the last thing that we talked about? The changes that I had, and you and I talked about on the pre-existing?
I didn't catch all of that. I took the draft that you sent earlier this evening and I circulated it to the village board.
That's great. All right. So, Gary, what would you like me to do here?
well, we can just open it up to questions if you want. Monday, I circulated what we had had before. I don't know what changes you made between Monday and today, but folks have had a couple days to take a look at it.
Yeah,
Okay,
so I have,
I will make a comment then. The only thing, I had some issues regarding the pre-existing uses. Those things, Gary, that you put in your little intro, at least those two. I don't know if there could be more. But the point that I want to make, at least from my perspective and experience, the current uses of these businesses is unlawful in the village. There is no zoning that permits them. So right now, those uses are unlawful uses. Now, we did put a section, I think wisely, in the draft that talks about these pre-existing uses and allows a safety valve for them to the extent that they have substantial investments in the property or investments in the property with an eye towards trying to get them to be legal as opposed to be illegal. They would be permitted to come to the village board for some relief over a short term. At this point in the discussion draft, we're talking about 18 months. Now, my concern was that they would be coming to the board without having been vetted by anybody virtually for compliance with the very safety and value issues that we put in for review by the zoning board. So in the draft that I worked on, I actually had them coming to the zoning board first to get retroactive approval, all right, should that be forthcoming. And then if there's a financial issue with them, to be able to come to the village board for some relief. Additionally, I did monetize as a guide to the board what might be reasonable in terms of a threshold for investment in the property. And just for a discussion point, by no means summary, I put in, let's see, at least 50, the greater of the following, at least 50% of fiscal expenditures for improvements to the dwelling or $5,000, whichever is greater. So that was sort of my feeling for what was appropriate to allow for some relief. It could be less, could be more, that's a matter of discussion.
Dan, could you just tell me what it is you're saying is illegal, that is a non-conforming use or an illegal use now?
It's an illegal use. Look, you have a business, right?
What is?
An Airbnb is a business.
An Airbnb is a
Right,
business.
just like a bed and breakfast was a business. A bed and breakfast was unlawful in the village until the village made it lawful by virtue of regulating it. Right now, the code says in an RV1 district, you can have a dwelling. You can have X, you have a special permit to do Y. Nothing in there authorizes the use of a property as a bed, as a short-term rental.
so,
Now,
okay,
to analogize, if somebody put up a shirt factory in the middle of the village, just because the zoning code doesn't address shirt factories doesn't mean it's lawful. To the contrary, the fact that the code doesn't list that as a permitted or especially permitted use makes it unlawful.
I don't understand why people renting an apartment in their house or rooms in their house is illegal.
Well, no, it's not renting apartments. There are provisions for what residency happens in the village. All right, for instance, a hotel. How do you differentiate a hotel? Somebody opens up a 40-room hotel in the middle of the village. Is that lawful? The code tells you.
I don't know. I know that we were trying to work on definitions for a lot of things in the village as far as residences, most particularly because we still don't have a definition for the inn. And I don't think we do even with these.
Well, the
So
inn was a pre-existing use that existed prior to the incorporation of the village, and it was treated as such when it came before the zoning board some years ago, and it had an actual use variance or a variance with conditions to do what it was doing. It was recognized as being a non-conforming use.
So you're saying that unless you have a specific, unless the village tells you you can use your house in a certain way, you can't? I mean, if there's no.
No, essentially that's correct. Well, essentially that's correct. For instance, if I decide to operate a storefront out of my house, I would not be permitted to do that, now would I?
I don't know. It doesn't,
Well, the answer is no. And that's why, although we defined more than we had, this was adopted in 1971 or whatever, that's why we defined things like hotels and tourist accommodations and defined them, because in some of the districts, they're lawful. All right, and that's what it's all about. Now, of course, owners can sublet, all right, but they can't run a business. And a bed and breakfast and an STR is a business.
I don't,
And shouldn't they be collecting taxes as a business and be registered as a business?
So I think, actually, I mean, and I'm not an expert in the tax strata. Like a bed and breakfast can be a de minimis use. I have no idea, right? But when you're operating, let's put it in the most easiest light to understand. If I'm operating an STR, it's not owner occupied, purely letting out, that's a business. I would wager that should be taxed as a business.
Right.
It's not residential. That's not a residential use.
Right.
Can I add some clarity? I think Heidi, the difference between renting out a room or an apartment that's different from a short-term rental is the length of time. So if you're renting out a room or an apartment or part of your house for a year at a time or 6 months at a time or whatever, I believe that's permitted currently based on what we have. But this is talking about short-term rentals a week at a time, 2 weeks at a time.
I think
what I was confused.
well,
if you
Go
look
ahead.
at most towns and villages, they say 30 days or less. If it's
Right.
less than 30 days, it's a short-term rental.
Right. So my piece that I want to add to this conversation is that the definition of a short-term rental, that you guys have proposed here, is a single-family dwelling owner occupied for at least 9 months of a year. Now, it's my understanding that the Airbnbs in the village are not owner occupied at all. They don't have anybody in their house that's the owner at any point of the year. Okay, there's a couple of them.
Yeah.
So, but my point is that at least some of them are nowhere near owner occupied for 9 months of the year. And in which case, per Dan's comments, even if we were to pass this definition, any of those would also be illegal or unpermitted because they're not owner occupied. So shouldn't we have some sort of rule to accommodate or to clarify those situations where it's a permanent Airbnb? It's an Airbnb 365 days a year. That's my question.
yeah, and I think what the buildings that Gary cited in the video, I think all of them don't meet all of them or most of them do not meet the short-term rental or bed and breakfast definition.
Right.
So I don't know what So I'm a little confused as to where this is all going. Plus, I'm
Why
still.
why do you
I'm
say
still
they
stuck
don't, why
back
do you
with
say they
Danny
don't
saying
meet the definition?
They,
They're
because
not owner occupied.
you're not owner occupied.
Three of them are.
Okay, but not,
Two of
okay,
them are
which one?
not.
Okay,
Okay.
well, if they're renting an entire house in the first one, the one that you said that cars were parked illegally on the street, then I don't, are you saying that they're occupied, they're, that they are most of the time, but then they get out to rent
That is
it?
not owner occupied, that one.
Okay, so that one's not on owner occupied, so that doesn't count to that. On the Burlington one, they're renting the entire house there, and I think we've all decided that that's an Airbnb and it's not owner occupied. So that isn't one either. The third one, which had the name of somebody in the village, said an entire apartment, 2 bedrooms, maximum of 4 guests. That might be a 2-family dwelling, but if there's an apartment within the house, then that's not either a bed and breakfast or a short-term rental. The entire guest suite that was the upstairs with a private entrance, maybe that's a short-term rental, but it was, clearly an entire floor of their house. And then the last one was the inn, which isn't a B&B or a short-term rental either.
Let
Yeah.
me ask the question. Does the board want to permit rentals, short-term rentals of properties that are not otherwise owner occupied?
That are not otherwise owner occupied.
In other words, we have right now, our definition provides that we aren't going to have short-term rentals for more than 90 days per year.
Right.
And the rest of the time they are owner occupied. Does the board want to have that restriction? Or does the board want there to be Airbnbs for people more than 90 days per year?
I guess my comment on that would be what kind of rabbit hole do we go down with those houses or homes that are currently functioning as 365-day Airbnbs if we do decide to go down that route? If that was the feeling of the board, because what do we do? I mean, the guy that bought the house on Jane's clearly bought it for the sole purpose of making it an Airbnb. Now,
Well, they didn't consult the zoning on that, did they?
right. So I guess
Very
what
good.
kind of rabbit hole do we go down with that? It seems like it could be potentially a big one. So without getting into what my personal feelings are yet, that's kind of where I'd like to start.
Well, aren't we going down a rabbit hole with any variation of this? I mean, I just have to kind of detour a little bit. Whatever happened to the place on Koval that was a B&B that the woman restored? Is that still a B&B?
No,
That's a single family home.
So I guess, Tom, what I would say is, like, if we had regulations around Airbnbs in general, that they had to have parking, X amount of parking spots, that there were limits on the amount of people per bedroom, that, whatever other provisions, those currently existing Airbnbs would have to meet those criteria in order to continue to function as such. But if we put the limit on it of an owner occupied, then it basically, precludes those businesses from operating potentially. Now, they're technically not allowed to operate right now, so I get that.
If you wanted to phase them out, you could legally do that. If you want to
Okay.
permit them, you could do that. If you want to have an owner occupied requirement, you could make that apply now or over time. And
Yeah.
but what Danny and I are here to do is to have the board set a policy, and then we put that in words. And right now, we threw some words out so that the board has something to work with. But the question is, what do you want?
Well, I'll just leave with my personal opinion. You guys can feel. I would support some sort of. I don't think permanent Airbnbs are good for the village. I would like to see some sort of owner occupancy, but I'd also like to see some sort of phase in for the people that are already here. Now, I know and understand that they did this against current village code, but I think it would be easier on us potentially to have some sort of phase out capacity, whatever that looks like. So that's kind of how I feel about it.
Matt, I may have misheard you. You said you'd rather go with basically with the proposal, which is that you have to live in the house part of the time to have a
Yeah.
Airbnb.
I mean, even if it was 6
but
months, yeah.
phase that aspect in for ones that already are in operation. Okay.
That would be my personal feeling on it. Yes.
Well, then
Can
what,
I just offer?
sorry, Dan.
That's all right. Can I just offer that I think that can be shoehorned, if not with the existing language, with additional language into the pre-existing use that we talked about just a few minutes ago. So I mean, there could be 18 months of forgiveness, basically, depending upon what the village board would do that under this rubric that we've proposed.
Okay.
Yep.
So if I'm reading this right, if Matt, you're suggesting that the owner should be occupying for X number of months to be allowed to do a short-term rental or a B&B or an Airbnb.
My thought is something similar to what happens in Saratoga Springs a lot of the time. People will move out of their house in the middle of June and they'll go stay up in their camp and wherever, and they'll rent out their house for track season, a couple months, pays their property taxes, and then they come back and they move in on Labor Day, something like that. I have no personal problem with somebody trying to do something like that. That would meet the definition of a short-term rental. I just don't think we should be permitting permanent 365-day a year short-term rentals in the village. I just think it presents a lot of problems, potential problems, and it's clearly a growing issue too because there's more and more of these cropping up. So
it would take 1 second, Paul. So a minimum of the five examples, 2 of them would be taken right off the board because the inn doesn't really count, and the property on Route 9 on the lake doesn't really count.
Right. And that's where I'd support some sort of phase in to, give that, although that person is technically violating the code right now, to give them some sort of ability to back out of it over time, whatever period of time. Dan mentioned 18 months, whatever it happens to be. I think that's reasonable.
I have a slight wrinkle on that. I pretty much agree with that. For the situation where somebody is in a house and then they leave and they rent it out, that they can do that for a period of time. I think there's a slight different situation if someone is living in the house, stays living in the house, and has a room they want to periodically rent out, and they meet all the other requirements. In other words, they're taking care of the place, they have adequate parking for another car. I kind of feel that perhaps we should allow that, so that the rule, the 90-day kind of rule, is for when it's not owner occupied, if you know what I mean. But for while a house is owner occupied, you could rent a room out a short term periodically. I don't see why we have to have those restrictions, provided everything else is met. They get the approval. There are a lot of people here, they don't want a whole long-term rental for the room upstairs, but they may want to periodically rent it out. And if they meet everything else, particularly parking, I'm not really opposed to that. But that's owner occupied while they're occupying it.
So would it be easier to say what it just seems to be awfully complex. And is there a certain thing that we don't want and we could be specific about that?
Yes.
I am concerned with the enforcement of all of this too. Peter, there's a lot of this is on you, There's,
Yeah, I share that view. I mean, I think it's very complex and we're laying a lot of stuff on Peter. And quite honestly, and I think this goes to something what Paul was alluding to. I mean, I know people who rent part of their house out to, I guess you'd call them tenants. I don't know that they're short-term, long-term. They have the parking.
Well, I don't think that would fall under short-term. We're looking at basically weekend or week-long exclusive use of the house.
Right.
But let's just say,
Like if your neighbor, for example, if your neighbor wanted to rent out the house and have 12 guests there, I mean, you could easily have 12 different cars zooming around the village. I mean, that's a problem.
I agree with you. That's the most egregious one in this case, in my opinion. The place on Burlington and Second, I kind of get that. It's an Airbnb. I think myself, I mean, we got our noses bent out of shape during a big snowstorm because the guy was dumping the snow in the street. But there's a lot of people around like have no place to dump their snow. But the guy on Burlington and Second, he's supposed to be being held to a higher standard, which I don't know that is being addressed here. He's supposed to be filing paperwork, attesting to who's in his place, when they're there, whether they've quarantined or not, and going on with the COVID restrictions. And I don't even believe we're holding his feet to the fire on that.
We never established that. That was just a concern that I had raised a few months ago. I mean, that was never.
We don't have that kind of legislation.
I'm sorry, Heidi.
I've never heard anybody would have to do something like that.
They have. That was just something that I mentioned.
I see where Paul.
Go ahead, Matt.
I was just saying, I can see where Paul's going, and I don't know whether we can kind of craft the language to sort of make a distinction between somebody that's permanently at the house but renting out a part of their house or a floor of their house as being distinct from, I think we all know what a short-term rental is. It's just a case of defining it adequately, and we know which places. And yes, there is one egregious example right now, but the problem is that until we craft something and get something down, this is something that could potentially continue to happen. And so I think it's worthwhile to try to get something down and define what a short-term rental is, define what we don't want, to Heidi's point, and then have some basic set of standards for those short-term rentals that do exist, for parking, capacity per room, and other things like that have been proposed. So I don't know whether we can sort of tweak the language a little bit to exclude properties which are permanently owner occupied or something to that extent. But I think that makes sense, Paul, what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think a little bit of the problem is when I read through the short-term rental, we define it as a owner-occupied single-family home that rented in part for less than 90 days. That's how we're defining it. But what if somebody's renting it out for more than 90 days? They just say, well, we're not a short-term rental. We're actually renting it for 120 days. I think in a way, the owner-occupied is a bit of a false thing here. To me, I'll call it an Airbnb, which I don't think we'd ever call it this. That kind of situation should be for owner-occupied resident. A resident that is owner-occupied can rent a room out on a short-term basis, provided they have adequate blah, 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 parking, whatever else we decide on. That's one thing to me. That covers everyone who I know of, a couple who have, rented upstairs or a room for, a couple of weeks or something like that. Then the other thing is these houses that get rented without anybody owner in it. That's where we limit it to, and I don't know that we even need to say owner occupied. We just say a house that is being rented out on a short-term basis for, is only allowed to do so for 90 days a year, this kind of thing.
Maybe we have something like permitted uses,
Yeah.
houses that are permanently owner occupied, renting out a portion of their house, houses that are occupied for at least 9 months of the year, blah, 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 blah. Non-permitted uses, houses that are owner occupied for less than 9 months of the year.
Yeah.
And you specifically exclude those cases where they're, basically used as permanent Airbnbs and, and with some sort of a phase out mechanism to allow those.
Yeah, because what I worry about the way we have it now is that there's a big use case that I think could grow over time where people are going to rent a room out while they're there in their own house. And in effect, we leave them basically illegal. I think they're making some money on that. And I want that large group of Airbnb type situation in somebody's house they live in. I know I have a friend who bought a house in Portland to use as an Airbnb, but in Portland, Oregon, you have to be owner occupied. So he bought it so his kid could live in the main part of the house. Then the kid went off somewhere and he ran into this problem because other cities do that. That's the owner occupied kind of thing.
I think Dan's point is, and I agree with him, that if it's not in the code, then it's not permitted. So if we say we don't mention, houses that are not owner occupied for 365 or 9 months a year, then therefore those are not permitted. But I think it's maybe worth putting explicitly what is not permitted, because I think that that's the problem, is that, people that are not maybe experts in municipal law think that they're good to go. And like you said, I could see a situation where somebody says, well, I'm not a short-term rental because I'm not even here. I'm renting it out 365 days a year. And then they go about it. And then Peter's got a heck of a job to do to get that person out of there. So I think something that's more explicit in terms of what is not permitted makes more sense to me. And as well as including some examples of what is permitted. So that, I don't know if that makes sense.
I agree. And in many ways, what concerns me most is all the other things that they could be doing that we don't want them to do. For instance, we have in here adequate parking, but we don't really define what that is. I know there's a thing about amount of space, but there are houses in this village that don't have any parking. Are we saying that, and I'm fine with that every room you rent out, you must have a space on your own property?
We did that with the
Does that mean a house that has,
we did that with the bed and breakfast.
I understand that.
definition.
Right,
So
I'm
if you have no
actually
parking,
fine with that.
you can't
but-
have a bed and breakfast.
Yeah. Right, I was just saying, I think we should clarify that a little, because we give some sizes, but I think it'd be good to have a clear statement. Every room that rents, or I don't know how you define it, every room or every, because you actually could have multiple people and one has to have a parking spot. If you're renting 2 rooms together to it, maybe it's there must be a parking spot for every tenant or something. Because you theoretically could have a family in 2 rooms and 1 car. That theoretically is okay with me. You shouldn't have to have 2 cars, 2
But I
parking
also
spots.
agree with Matt that the Saratoga season kind of thing, that, there ought to be allowances for people that want to do that too. I mean, that isn't necessarily, you have to be a reasonable person. You have to, you have to deal with parking and noise, but we have ordinances for parking and noise, and, you can't be on the street and you can't be loud and, that, but I think we ought to find some way to do that as well. I don't think we should be overly restrictive. I like what you're saying, Matt, that if we define what is a non-permitted use and some of the permitted uses, that might work.
Maybe we say non-permitted uses not limited, including but not limited to. I just think it's worth having something in the code that makes it more explicit to people, so that we don't have to go, send Peter and and they people that can look through the code can see that a 365 day a year Airbnb is not permitted in the village of Round Lake quite easily. And if they don't do that beforehand, then I have not much sympathy for them. But I do have a little bit of sympathy for people that may not understand that, because the law is silent on the matter of short-term rentals in the Village of Round Lake does not mean that they're permitted. I do have a little bit of sympathy for people that, did not maybe understand that and are currently operating those types of businesses. And therefore, that's why I think we should have some sort of phase-out mechanism for them.
I think I don't disagree. I think we've got 5 different examples. I don't know if there are any more examples in the village. But we do have at least 2 of those examples are pretty much removed from this. The property on Route 9 wouldn't even qualify. They've got plenty of parking. They can do what they want. They're not, they could be advertising that also as an apartment for rent. We have no idea. We just know that in one place we found it as a short-term rental.
This is not the only Airbnb he owns. He has another one on Saratoga Lake. I get the sense he bought this property and renovated it a little bit without a building permit, without talking to the village, with making it an Airbnb. That was what he intended to do right from the get-go.
Well, I was talking about Cindy Sabia's over on the other side, where, I mean, it seems to me that whatever she's doing is probably within her rights to do it.
He went to the zoning.
The place on Ames, I have a big problem with. I mean,
Yeah,
that guy, he can't park the number of cars on his property, I don't believe, the number of people he's advertising for. He's not an owner, an occupier. He's gone somewhere else. But he's the guy we ought to be, and the guy on Burlington and Second. I don't know how you deal with parking for a situation like that. You risk putting people out of business. Is that fair? And do they have any recourse?
That's why I think the phase out type thing makes sense, because I agree with you. But I mean, technically, letter of the law is that they're operating an illegal business in the Village of Round Lake. I understand, that's the letter of the law, as I think Dan and Tom have said. But if we allow, and the thing is, if we do nothing about it, these types of things are going to continue to pop up too. So if we take no action as a board, then there could be a half dozen of these in the next 5 years. We don't know. So I think we ought to take some sort of action on it, but I think it's reasonable to allow those people that are operating those 365-day-a-year businesses to have some sort of ability to get out of it. And that would be a phase out, to say, hey, look, you got 18 months, you got 2 years, whatever it is. And, that's it. It's not permitted in the Village of Round Lake. We're not going to allow it. We're not going to allow any further examples of this, but guess what? We're going to give you a little bit of a reprieve on that and allow you to get out of, so people don't, it's at the end of the day, they can sell the property hopefully and recoup, their investment. That's what I would hope.
Tom Peterson, is that unfair to a landowner to tell him he has X number of weeks, months, or years to change the way he's operating the house he owns?
You're muted, Tom.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, a lot of those houses, like the one on Burlington, was a long-term rental. And he couldn't find a renter, so he decided to make it an Airbnb. It wasn't bought as a Airbnb. It was a rental property for that guy. He just found this maybe more lucrative for him to use it as an Airbnb.
So I'll just go back to Tom Peterson again. If you set a time limit on whether it's weeks, months, or years, and say you're doing a business that we're going to now make illegal, you're going to have to change your way of or sell the house or something. Is that legal? Can we do that?
Yeah.
We're not now making it illegal. I mean,
It is
it's
illegal.
illegal currently.
Okay, guys, it's called amortization, and it will be upheld by the courts if you have a reasonable calculation to allow the landowner using the property in the way that's being phased out to get his reasonable investment back.
Thank you.
And I will say that I am less persuaded than others that the current uses being made by landowners offering their places for short-term rentals are clearly illegal under our current code. Maybe they
Okay.
are, maybe they aren't, but it's not crystal clear. And trying to accommodate people by phasing things out is prudent.
Okay.
Can I say something? I know, should I wait till the comment period?
Go ahead.
Is-
I've heard a few concerns about existing properties, but I'm not entirely clear on what the goal is for banning this altogether. I think in some cases, the short-term rentals have benefited probably the village, but certainly the property owners. For example, the house that Kim lives in, we Airbnb'd it over the summer because we knew somebody would be moving in the fall. We had plenty of parking. There was no impact on anyone. And it enabled us to buy the house when we probably would have thought twice about it. There are probably other situations that are situational that might argue for it. So it seems like if you identify the things you're trying to avoid, and we do, I mean, the parking for 12 people is kind of difficult to get around, but we do have a parking ordinance and noise ordinances and other things like that. But it's not unreasonable to set up some kind of permission process that isn't really Byzantine and difficult, just to, make sure that you know what you're getting into in terms of the village's expectation, the property owner's expectation. But I think that an effort to ban this altogether is short-sighted.
I don't think anybody's proposing that.
I
Well-
thought that's what I was hearing,
Yeah,
that
no,
you would have a phase-out period.
No,
No,
no, go ahead.
Go
Matt.
ahead. I think we were going to permit it for, say, up to 90 days per year, for instance, to be discussed, but some period of time where it would be permitted to rent out a house like I froze there.
An
Did you get there? Okay.
owner-occupied house.
Yeah, so, if it's 3 months a year or 4 months a year or whatever, I mean, I know the proposal was 3 months a year, maybe there's some middle ground, I don't know, but they wouldn't be completely forbidden, but what would be completely forbidden would be potentially, and is my feeling, is sort of permanent Airbnbs within the village.
So again, though, my question probably remains is, what is the harm that you're seeing that you're worried about? They
It's
actually
all-
probably take better care of the property because they have to keep it in rental shape than they might for a long-term rental.
Well, I think the most, as someone stated, the most egregious example is the one on James Ave, allowing 12 guests. I mean, that is.
Yeah,
Well,
but
what I-
what's the harm of 12 guests? Is it 12 cars? 12 cars is a problem on village streets. You're not allowed to park on the street.
There could be a concert at SPAC and 15 guys from New York City are coming up, getting drunk and want to hang out for a couple of days in the village to go to their concerts. I don't think that's a good
Well,
idea.
And
We
what- I'll
actually
tell you
hosted
the- I'll tell you the problem. is
bachelor
that when I talk
parties.
to the people who live down there, I spend a lot of time down there, is that cars going too fast down there. So you've got 8-10 cars out of towners who don't, who are just zooming
Well-
through the streets around Lake.
I would say this, Lydia, this is my opinion on it, is that right now we only have a few examples of this, but again, we don't know where it's going to go in the future. But the best thing about Round Lake is the community, the people that live here. People have lived here for years or months, but they want to be a part of this community. And if you start having these types of places crop up, in multiple parts of the village, and you have basically people that don't ever live here that are basically using it as a glorified hotel, then that detracts from what is unique about Round Lake, which is a deeply and closely knit community. And I think that, in addition to the public nuisance aspects of it, which I think are very real, I don't know that it's something we want to really encourage. And if other municipalities are implementing short-term rental restrictions, then business owners that, you know, they're smart. They're going to go to municipalities that don't have restrictions. And so, you know, as you see more municipalities implement these types of restrictions on short-term rentals, I would expect that any municipality that doesn't have sort of regulations on it will be leveraged by people that are looking to make money out of it. So that's my feeling on it. I don't think it's, you know, I could, if everything stopped today, would it be okay? Sure. Other than the place that's parking 5 cars on the street, could we enforce that with current policy? Sure. But if we don't do anything now, I worry that, you know, it's going to become a real problem for us down the road. And I think it's something we ought to nip in the bud. So that's my feeling on it.
And to speak to what you're saying, Lydia, first of all, I think the idea of 3 months or whatever as an interim period is okay, as Matt was saying, not letting it shift into a full-time business. But I was interested, I don't know if you're on then, but my point was, I think we should allow owner occupied, while owners live there, the ability for residents to rent a room out on a short-term basis or a part of their house, provided they have parking, and make sure that they're covered, so that, you know, somebody living alone in a house could rent a portion of it out on the short as an Airbnb. That doesn't bother me if the owner's living there and there's adequate parking and stuff. Because I don't
So,
think we'd have those other problems.
Paul, I
Danny, it
would,
looks
I would
like we're-
consider that,
it
I
looks
would
like
consider
we
that
are
being a roommate for a few months. I wouldn't even consider that a short-term rental. I would
Well,
consider
we just gotta
that
be
taking
careful
on a
because they may
room.
advertise it. They might advertise an Airbnb, and whether others would complain, and I just would want to make sure that we don't suddenly have use there where they're doing anything illegal. If we decide that that's totally legal, anyone can rent a portion of their place, then the only issue would be, well, can we cover parking then? Because it's not mentioned, and many people live here and have more cars than they have parking. So in a way that would allow them to do it because they have a roommate and throw in extra cars that don't have parking. So I kind of like the idea of them having to sign up if they're going to Airbnb a portion of their house, and we make sure it's approved and that they have proper parking and stuff.
And I don't think
Well,
it has
and-
to be onerous.
I don't know, the approval, well,
No, it shouldn't be on that.
the approval process that is in there, like I said, there's a special use permit, an operating permit, affirmation that you're following village code, New York Uniform Code, authorization for physical inspection of the building and lot by Peter. That you could suspend and revoke the permits. There's fines. There's fines for the first offense. There's fines within the second 5 years. Like, who's going to keep track of all of this?
Well, there's fines for parking and there's fines for noise ordinance violations. I mean, it's not that much different.
I think in physically inspecting someone's house and making sure that of how many, you know, people they have per room, you know, is a lot. And
I think that would be in response to a complaint by a neighbor. That would be my guess. I don't think Peter's going to be making his weekly rounds of the Airbnbs in the village to go peek in the windows and see what's going on. I think if there were a specific complaint made by a neighbor, then there would be the mechanism within the code to enforce it and allow it.
We had trouble getting permission to get in to see what's going on at the inn at Round Lake because we're not. It's really a protection thing.
yeah, but I mean,
know,
I
if
think we need to simplify this because it's kind of a lot. Meets all New York State Health Department regulations. You know, who?
I don't disagree with that. I think we can simplify it a little bit.
Yeah.
Make it, I mean, maybe there's sort of a, I don't know, some sort of guideline process we could put on the website, for instance, you know, short-term rentals in Round Lake, or I don't know, some sort of policy document that we could put out there for people to help better understand it. You know, I think it could do with some simplification, but I do think we need to have some ground rules in place going forward.
I don't disagree. I just think that I agree with Heidi. It seems incredibly complex, and you know, you'd have to send a notification out to so many people in the village because we're really not 100% sure. I won't name names, but there's people very close to me that rent a part of their house out. Now, I don't know if they're renting them short-term rentals, long-term rentals. I don't know. How do you decide whether you need to query those people as to their intentions and whether they meet all the guidelines? I mean, it just seems, I agree. I mean, there ought to be something, but I mean, this seems an onerous, complex, process here for people. I don't know.
Well, can we go back? Can we look at talking about conforming uses and non-conforming uses per Matt's suggestion and simplifying the permitting and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Is there? Or I don't know. I mean, I don't.
Well, we could just take the next couple weeks to look it over and jot down our suggestions, send them to me, and then I'll send them to Dan and Tom and Peter. Our
Yeah.
suggestions for simplifying it.
Yeah, I think there should just be
And
maybe some sort of
take out-
streamlined process.
What your ideal,
Yeah.
what your ideal
Yeah.
scenario would be.
Well, I don't have a big problem with a lot of this either. But I hear what you're saying, that it hasn't happened yet, but I know that other much larger municipalities have had issues, with, lots of Airbnbs. So I think we ought to be careful and keep it small and very defined about what it is that we don't want. And then, if it's true, I'm still kind of not understanding that all these other uses are not legal because they're not defined. Then we could put some examples in about those. But I don't.
May
I mean,
I
I'm
ask some,
super worried about this. Anyway, go ahead.
may I ask some questions and get kind of a straw poll with certain issues so that Danny and I have some guidance?
Yeah.
Right now, the way things are set up is if you want to be in the rental business in any way, shape, or form, you got to get an operating permit, which is kind of a foundational thing that allows Peter to go in, take a look, and make sure there are no real safety issues. Is that something we want to keep, at least for this draft?
That's something we have now, that if you're renting a property. that-
No, that's something that's in this draft.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Okay, can I
I
ask
think initially,
thumbs up or thumbs down on
If
that?
you want to get into the short-term rental business, you mean? The short-term
Yeah.
rental?
No, if you're a long-term renter as well. This is an annual operating permit for anybody who's letting someone else come in and rent their property. This is a way to make sure that safety concerns are met.
Are we talking about people with known apartments? Or are we talking about people who rent rooms?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
okay.
And I would be.
So nobody's giving me a thumbs down on that. So that's the way things are set
No,
up now.
I really don't.
Well-
I really don't see how that anybody renting any part of their house under any circumstances at any time needs to be inspected for safety concerns. Is that what you're saying?
But that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think.
I'm not recommending it. I'm just
No, I
saying.
know. That's what you're.
I would
I
have
think
to-
if you,
Go ahead.
I was
Tom.
gonna say, I think I almost agree with it if there were a way to isolate out a statement that this does not refer to owner occupied houses that rent a portion of their house. In
Yeah.
other words, what you're talking about, I think, should affect all business that are operating as businesses, where they take a house, they try to turn it into apartments, or they turn it into short-term rentals, and we should have an exception for, and we might not call it Airbnb, as you said, Gary, maybe it's just owner occupied homes while the owners are there are free to rent a room on a short-term basis, provided they meet our parking and other requirements, or certain requirements.
Okay, so if I'm renting a house or portion of my house and I don't reside there at the time, then that would require an operating permit. But if I live there and I'm renting the upstairs,
Right.
while I live there, I don't need to get an operating permit. Is that what we're looking at for
That-
this draft?
Yes.
I think that's better.
Heidi, is
I
that,
don't agree. What if somebody's renting out an illegal basement? Somebody has their basement and they're renting it out. There's only one means of egress. It doesn't meet code. There's no smoke alarm. There's
Well,
no
the-
carbon monoxide alarm.
The problem I see with that
We
is
have
that
some sort of responsibility as a
Oh.
village. I know as a
Well,
building inspector, I do.
calling that, I mean, when Lorene finally gets fed up with Matt and kicks him out for a few months, and he wants to bunk at my house for a few months, I
Mm-hmm.
consider that a roommate, not a short-term rental. And if
Right.
a roommate wants to live in the basement, even though there's only one egress, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I don't think that's really,
But you're not renting it
Well-
out. You're allowing your friend to stay in your basement. You're not renting
he'll
it
give me-
out. Somebody.
and he'll give me
you're running a business.
$200 a month. I mean, there's no formal arrangement, but
There's
Is it
no way,
illegal? Yes, it is. Is it
Pe-
against
Peter-
the building code? Yes, it is.
Peter, if I put my children in a basement with only one means of egress, would there be any mechanism for you as a code enforcement officer to enforce that?
If I got a search, I could get a search warrant and go in. Yeah, I could.
So that's what, I think.
I wouldn't do it. I mean, I would not do anything like that, but
I
you
hope you
know,
would.
Oh, I think, Peter,
think
Peter,
that
aren't you
there's a
talking,
reason why.
aren't you talking more, Peter, about a long-term rental when somebody has a house with another portion? I think Aaron had one, right? You always complained about, where, isn't that a whole other thing where you have like you rent out the whole basement as an apartment? I don't know where that falls in. I'm referring to someone doing short-term rental in their house when they live in it, in a room of theirs.
I inspect all multifamilies. So if there are 3 units in a building, and in Round Lake, we have
Yeah.
Alumni Hall, we have the
Right.
place down on the lake, they all get inspected every year. We have to make sure they have fire, smoke alarms and means of egress and carbon monoxide alarms. I think it protects the owner of the property. It protects the
Yeah.
people that rent there. And
Yeah.
I think if you're going to rent a room in your house or part of your house, you'd want to make sure that it's safe for whoever's renting that, especially if they're your buddy.
I think somebody who would rent their basement illegally isn't going to follow any process anyway, and you already have a way to go after them. So I don't think you should try to address that situation.
Let me backtrack here. I think we should try to, instead of revising everything, I think what this is about is a targeted approach to, at least my opinion on it anyway, is a targeted approach to try and put ground rules in place for short-term rentals. So, this is a discussion I believe that we could have at another time when it comes to all rentals in the village. But I think right now what we're discussing is specific language and verbiage around short-term rentals. So I think this is a conversation we could have at another time about operating permits at large. But I'd like to keep this discussion or this addition to the code specifically targeted towards this specific problem. That's kind of my feeling on it.
okay. Do we want to keep operating permits for short-term rentals? I recommend that we do.
Yes.
Is the definition of short-term rental, is this new?
Yes,
Okay. All right, so there was a bed and breakfast definition, but there was not a short-term rental definition.
yes.
All right, so we might want to talk about the definitions in here too.
They are the most important part.
Right, so, to Paul and Matt's, at least, discussion, the period of less than 30 consecutive nights for cumulative rental not to exceed 90 days, we need to figure that out.
Well, let me interject here, because during our discussion tonight, a distinction has been made between short-term rental for someone not living in the building at the time that the renter is there,
Mhm.
and people who do. So perhaps this 90-day maximum maybe that should only apply when you have an owner who's not living there. It's up to the board, but that seems to be a legitimate distinction as to whether or not the owner is there at the time that the renter is there as well.
Right, so yeah, maybe there's two versions of short-term rental, but yes, this one says a single-family dwelling owner occupied for at least 9 months that is rented, and then those periods of time. And so maybe there's two different, I agree with you, Matt, that it should be a targeted approach, because this is just gonna get huge.
Yeah, I think we should keep it very limited, and what we're trying to do, in my opinion, and I think judging by everybody else's comments, you're in agreement, is what we're trying to do is stop these couple of instances of permanent Airbnbs and put some regulations in for those that are not permanent Airbnbs to make sure that, that they're in compliance with various, policies regarding parking and things like that, capacities and things like that. So I think that's the two areas. I think number one is what we're trying to get rid of. And number two is those that remain, can we put some sensible and targeted regulations in place that they can conform to?
Okay, that's a laudable goal, but let's get specific. So if you don't reside in the house at the time that your guests are there, are we happy that you can rent up to 90 days during the year?
Yeah, yes.
Tom, are you
Or 3
saying
or
that,
4.
are you saying that the owner has to be in the house at the same time?
I'm not saying anything. I'm saying you tell me with
So,
enough specificity that I know how to put it down in words. What do
So I think-
What I thought I
what do
heard you
you
say
want?
was owner occupied doesn't mean it's not like the bed and breakfast. It's 3 or 9 months out of
When
the
a-
year, the owner lives there, then they're gone and the guest.
when the owner
living in
is
the house
when the owner is not on the property concurrently or not residing in the property concurrently with the renter, then that is limited to no more than 90 days per year, and if it's less than 30 days at a time, something like along those lines.
Well, the board is happy to permit that. 90 days of rental during the year when the owner is not present. Yes or no?
Some
Yes.
number of days.
Yeah, for now, yes.
Now, yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
And
Yes.
if the owner is on the premises for day 91, can that owner rent the upstairs, provided the owner is there during that period of time?
Yes.
Yes.
Can the owner come on the premises for a short period of time, leave, and the clock start ticking again?
No. I think we would have to, to reside, or
Well,
that seems like it.
Cumulative total, the cumulative total rental not to exceed 90 days within a year.
Right.
Yeah.
So if they came back one day between each visitor, still you'd add up to your 90 days when they're not there.
Right.
Well,
So we
you're
don't have year-round rentals, basically, year-round
right. Okay,
short-term
yeah,
rentals.
because you're essentially saying that it would be the owner's legal place of residence, because the owner would have to be there for at least 9 months of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know for other purposes, in tax law, it's 181 days. So, you got to be there for 181 days to claim it as your, so they would have exceeded that. It would be their legal residence. And
That's
then.
kind of what
that-
we're
that
aiming for.
period- Yeah, in that
Well-
period, the 3 months or whatever it was, that they
I
could go
think
anywhere.
theoretic, I'm not sure how it's worded right now, but theoretically, I think the owner could just shut the door and not be in there 9 months, and only rent it out 3 months. Because I don't know, are we requiring the owner to be there 9 months of the year, or are we just
You
saying they
can't
can't
require
rent it
people
out
to
more?
live in a house.
Oh.
You can't, people could own a house and not live in it.
Right, so I don't think that's really an issue. We're
No.
basically saying it's an owner occupied dwelling and they can't rent it out to others more than 90 days. I don't really care what they do the other 9 months as long as they're not renting it out.
Right.
You know?
Yep.
Okay, under short-term rentals, for a special use permit, we have 5 provisions. One is we notify all neighbors within 200 feet of the applicant's real property. At this time, do we want to leave that provision in?
What is the purpose of that unless there's the people within 200 feet have some say in the matter? What's the point of what are we saying? I've
Well,
got to say to my neighbor that I'm going to rent this out for X number of weeks. Okay, so what?
Well, if you wanted a zoning variance, there are requirements for neighbor notification to allow people whose ox might be gored to come in and ask questions or put forth their opinions. That's the purpose here. And that's why I'm asking you whether you want it in or not. It doesn't mean that the neighbors have the right to veto it or have to approve it. It just means they have the right to come in and have their say.
Well,
And
then I
to-
think we should just make it clear that the reason we're putting in the 200 feet thing is that the neighbors do have some recourse if they choose to go to the ZBA or whatever.
Before the fact and not after the fact.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
if
is that,
I don't understand, because if this is a conforming use, then why do you have to inform the neighbors?
you
because
need
it's not a
special use
conforming
permit.
use, you have to get a special use permit. And the special use permit may have its own requirements. We have 5 of them. And then there are additional set of requirements for a special use permit that are very woozy. It fits into the character of the neighborhood, blah, blah, blah. Neighbors have a right to come in and give their opinion on that and try to persuade the ZBA as to whether or not that special use permit should be granted.
These are basically the same requirements as for the bed and breakfast from 25 years ago that we
Right.
did, correct?
And am I correct in saying that the way we're talking about it now does not really affect somebody just renting a room in their own house while they're there? We're
That's the way
talking
we're
about these
Yes.
businesses, what we're considering a business, yeah. Because then you're right. I mean, we don't know what the objection would be. It doesn't mean they can automatically stop it, but maybe they have some really good reason why it shouldn't be next door that we're not thinking
Just
of.
think it makes for good practice on our part to keep
Right.
neighbors informed of what's going on. And, even if they can't necessarily do anything about it, at least they're informed that this is going on so that they're not blindsided and then come screaming at the board down the road. So I think it's wise to at least give people a heads up.
Okay, then we'll leave this in this current, in the next draft that gets circulated to the board. 2, demonstrates the proposed uses in harmony with the requirements of the zoning law will not adversely affect the neighborhood, blah, blah, blah. That's so vague. I don't
understand.
have any
that.
question related to that. 3, demonstrates adequate parking capacity. Okay, and again, I think that's going to depend on, if the owner is there and using up the parking space, how's he going to put the guests there? If the owner's not there, then, and he restricts his guests to 1 vehicle, then I guess it's not going to have an impact, but that's
So this would
probably
be,
the single most important factor.
when we say adequate parking, this would be subject to what the zoning board deems. So when the applicant comes before the ZBA, in this case for a special use permit, the zoning board would be able to determine whether that site has adequate parking, correct?
Yes, that's right.
yeah, I have no problem with that.
Okay, meets all New York State Health Department regulations and provides proof. That hopefully will have been done in getting the operating permit. It may be a bit redundant, but it's very important. And then 5 is very important, carries liability insurance to protect the guests.
Yeah.
So those provisions are going to stay in the next draft.
Okay.
Yep.
And then the special use permit is good for 2 years.
Okay.
Danny, what else do we need to inquire about?
I don't think he's, oh, there he is.
He's muted.
Is Dan there?
We might have wore him out.
He's watching CNN. It's more exciting than
Oh,
this.
there he is. He
Oh.
came off mute.
I did that. I don't know if I woke
Oh,
him,
okay.
though.
Okay, and then I guess we'll include the distinction, but with that 90 days, whether you live there at the time your guests are there, whether you don't, that'll be part of the next draft.
Yes.
Why don't we let it go and see what we come up with in the next draft?
Okay.
Happy with that.
Oh, my goodness.
I need a drink.
Workshop before.
Did you see that they locked Trump's Twitter account?
Yeah,
I
for
saw
12
that.
hours.
Well,
That reminds me, our next meeting is Inauguration Day, isn't it?
No. Well,
What?
yes, it is.
I think
But
by
it's in-
7 o'clock,
It's in
I
the
expect to
evening.
be-
Paul.
I know, but I'll probably be too drunk by then.
The,
Matt and I.
the Republic will have collapsed by 7 o'clock at night.
Oh, it's possible.
I am actually, will not be here on the 20th, so you can count me out already.
We have a public hearing about building permits.
That's right.
All right, so we done with that for now?
Yeah.
Thankfully.
Move on.
I can't wait to see Kim's minutes for this. It's gonna be great.
Discussion ensued.
Yes.
My favorite line.
I am recording it. I remembered to do it this time, so we can relive the
Okay, good.
glory. All right, next is the sale of the fire chief's car. Anybody have resolution 12 there?
Yes, I'll move it.
It be it resolved that the Round Lake Village Board of Trustees authorizes the sale of the 2011 Chevy Tahoe, AKA Chief's Car, to the Village of Stillwater Fire Department for the sum of $10,000. Resolved by
Tom?
Tom Bergen.
Second.
All discussion? Paul?
Tom,
Yes.
Heidi,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
Gary.
Yes. And resolution number 13, Fire Protection Service Agreement. Be it resolved that the Round Lake Village Board of Trustees instructs the mayor to sign the Fire Protection Service Agreement with the Town of Malta and the Round Lake Hose Company number 1.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
Yes.
Tom, Heidi,
Yes.
Paul, Matt,
Yes.
Yes.
Gary.
Yes.
Okay. Gary,
And
Gary, I can come in and notarize that tomorrow because I don't think I have done it yet. And then Frank, should we leave it for you to bring to Tom Mazza?
yeah, I thought,
Yeah,
thought,
we were talking about that today. I thought you had to notarize it, but Gary thought that I already had it.
I've signed it twice already.
Have you? So who has it now?
I brought one to our board.
Okay.
We're
All right,
gonna get approval Monday night. We have to do the same thing.
Okay.
We gotta get approval
All
from
right.
the membership Monday
Let's get
night,
together
and
tomorrow.
I'll bring it back Tuesday either way.
And then we'll bring it to Malta.
And then we can get it up to Malta. If it's the
Okay.
right one, we'll just copy it and I'll bring it right up to Malta on Tuesday.
And this is for 3 years, so we don't have to go through this again for
Right.
a while. So that's great.
Okay, next is public comment.
I don't think there's any public on except Heidi.
No.
Not Heidi, Lydia.
Lydia.
Sorry, Heidi. I was looking at your name, but this.
And I have a question, but are you gonna go, are you gonna ask us? I'm gonna ask, I hate to beat this to death, but Tom Peterson, there's still some of these definitions that just seem kind of, I don't know. I'd be willing to have a conversation about it sometime, a tourist home versus a, and whether it's at least 4, but not more than 10 sleeping rooms. I just don't know where we're getting some of these.
Lots of cooks in the kitchen.
Ah,
Gross.
well, you're gonna put together a draft and it will be a simplified, beautiful thing, and then we could make comments off of that.
A great big beautiful draft. I love that. Why don't you and I talk tomorrow and we can go through it and blue pencil the document?
Could we talk Friday? I do not work on Friday.
Okay, that would be fine.
All right, what time would you like to do that?
9 o'clock.
9, okay. Oh, yeah, I've got an 8 to 9 meeting. How about 9:30?
Works for me, I think.
Well, we'll
Over
pencil.
over the din of circular saws and power.
I haven't been here in 2.5 weeks and I don't want to talk about it.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Oh,
Ooh, wow.
I'll second that one.
Is that okay with Lydia?
That came from nowhere.
All right, break's
We
over.
reached a
Matt.
logical stopping point.
Your break's over.
Okay. All right. Good
All
night,
right, good night, all.
everybody.
Thank
Night,
you.
everybody.
Well,
Right.
Bye.